Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Alex Stevens. I'm the Manager of Policy and Communications at the American Energy Alliance, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Earlier this year, AEA released the American Energy Blueprint, which was a comprehensive set of policy recommendations and a guide to the Trump administration and the new Congress's approach to energy policy. The blueprint outlined key reforms in areas such as federal land and water use, expanding consumer choice, reducing subsidies, curbing government spending and taxation, reviewing regulations, and modernizing the permitting process. Out of the 76 total recommendations that we made in the blueprint, 30 have been completed or significantly advanced. 24 of them have been partially initiated, and 22 of them have not been addressed yet. So we're thrilled to have you guys join us today to explore what the Trump administration and Congress have done and what they've accomplished so far and what lies ahead. Our panel today includes two of my colleagues here at AEA. First up, we have AEA's President Tom Pyle. Tom and I are going to take a look back at the past 8 months and walk through what has been accomplished on the energy policy front so far. And then after that, we have Kenny Stein, who's our Vice President of Policy. He's going to share some insights on what we anticipate from the administration and from Congress through the end of 2025 here. At the end, we'll wrap up with the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just submit them in the Q&A channel at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address those at the end. Tom, I'll start with you just to kick us off. And what I'd like to do is just sort of get your reflection on the past 8 months here. Uh, from your perspective, how has the energy policy landscape really changed? And what's your assessment so far of what the administration and Congress has done since January here?
Yeah, thanks. First, before I get started, I want to thank both Alex and Kenny. This organization is as effective as it is because of the people that work here. And I'm really excited that we've had a pretty good run this year in terms of seeing a lot of the things that we've been talking about and fighting for and pushing for on behalf of consumers, ratepayers, companies, businesses, the economy in general. It's really been tremendous. It's almost like pushing a boulder up a hill year after year after year, and then all of a sudden it just rolls down the other side. And that's kind of how I feel like this year has been with respect to energy policy. I think the single most significant and important thing that has been accomplished this year has been a thorough and perhaps more lasting than a lot of the other things because of the nature of the way Washington works these days, where you have an administration come in and exerts tremendous push within the administration. Executive orders are only really declarations of an administration's posture towards an issue. For example, President Biden clearly had a whole of government approach to the climate agenda, and clearly President Trump 2.0 has almost complete opposite, but equally massive focus on what he phrases obviously as American energy dominance. The electric vehicle mandate, sort of this fantasy that we were going to force the auto industry to electrify, has, I think, been the most significant in terms of policy change. If you look at what Congress did by nullifying the California waiver to regulate greenhouse gas at the tailpipe, if you look at the One Big Beautiful Bill, the credits are expiring at the end of this month. I think I saw an announcement the other day where they're giving Tesla and GM and some others a couple of extra weeks or whatever. But the point is that they're gone. The small little change in the CAFE penalties, significant as well. And of course, and Kenny, I'm sure will go into detail on this, but the tailpipe rule tied to the endangerment finding. And then, of course, DOT NHTSA still has to deal with the CAFE numbers for a 5-year window. And we have some suggestions for that, which we can get into. But if you look at the permanency of things, that is perhaps the most lasting, I think, in terms of President Trump's commitment on the campaign trail to end EV mandates and get us back to choice. It's what it's always been about. People should be free to choose the types of cars and trucks that best suit their needs. The companies that make those automobiles and trucks should be paying attention to consumers, not government fiats and mandates. And that whole road happened and started in 2008-9 during the bailouts. President Obama put tremendous pressure on the autos. They had really no choice but to go along with what they self-admittedly said were completely unrealistic targets in terms of fuel efficiency. So that to me is, I think, the biggest and most lasting change here. The one big beautiful bill, of course, has a whole lot of other goodies in there. We wanted, of course, all of the IRA subsidies eliminated, including those for CCS and everything else. And for the record, we did not support the subsidy for metallurgical coal. We just don't think that the government should be in the business of steering taxpayer dollars towards preferred energy sources or technologies. So we have some more work to do there, obviously. Federal lands, complete 180-degree flip. President Biden issued the fewest leases of any president in history. President Trump has taken the approach that we're going to open up these lands and make them available. And I think that's important, not for today, but for tomorrow. President Biden was fond of saying, well, what do you guys complain about? You guys are making record production. Decisions about making federal lands available for oil and gas production or any energy source are decisions about the future. And those clamping down those leases and not making them available denies that opportunity tomorrow. So just like the decisions of the previous Trump administration allowing and opening up access to those resources affected prices and the ability to lease during the Biden administration. So a lot of progress was made there. I'm sure you guys will get into it as well. So those are some of the highlights. I think that we've been pushing these messages of the Green New Deal, the net zero agenda. All of these things will have detrimental impacts on consumers, on ratepayers, on prices, on the ability to manufacture things. Look at Germany. Look at the UK. I just saw an article today that the leader of the Socialist Party in Germany issued a scaling critique of the British approach to energy in their country, and recommended that they immediately make their gas resources available for production and nuclear as well. So when you lose the socialists on an issue like this, then that's pretty telling. I also saw there was like some 120,000 manufacturing jobs in Germany gone in the last couple of months. So those are telling. And the other thing that's telling is that we're not talking about climate anymore. Not even the folks that were promoting this agenda. They're now talking about being part of the solution. The word isn't even being used practically in those circles. And we'll get into this too, because this is about policy, but it's also about communication. And the impact of high electricity rates is going to be a subject in probably the midterms, and certainly maybe beyond that into the next general election. So lots of topics, lots of data here. Appreciate everybody who's joining us here in the webinar. I know, Alex, for those who can't make it, we're going to make this available afterwards. I really want this to be sort of a free-flowing deal between us. And then, folks who have questions, if you do have questions and we don't necessarily need to save them to the end, Alex, you can monitor that and get some of the folks who have joined us today involved in the conversation. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Alex, and look forward to hearing what you're going to deliver us here.
Sure. Yeah. So if you have questions, there's a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen there. Happy to go through those as we sort of go through things here. Tom, I think, one of the main things that we've encountered this year, which has been a pleasant surprise, and you touched on it a little bit, has just been the fact that we've had members of Congress who've been willing to go to bat for a lot of these policies. I think, when the CRA votes came up on the EV stuff, uh, initially we were probably a little worried about, the follow through there. And then during the reconciliation process, obviously the fight over, the renewable energy subsidies that took place kind of in the last hours there. I think we should talk a little bit just about that, how that's been a change, from how we've seen these things play out in the past, and then just like, what exactly it sort of means going forward, in terms of the momentum for these policy objectives.
Yeah, that's great because this has been an important change as well. We've been fighting the PTC, ITC, and whatever monster or version of that's been around since 1992. Um, we have seen in the past that we've had supporters, sympathetic supporters on Capitol Hill for our position, which is we should eliminate these subsidies and let these energy sources compete on their own. But we've never had champions. We've never had members of Congress or senators who were willing to obstruct. We're willing to do procedural things. We're willing to do holding up things, voting down bills, legislation. If you recall, during the big beautiful bill fight, the Ways and Means Committee, or the Budget Committee, I should say, they lost the first round, right? And the main reason that they lost the first round and forced that long weekend of negotiations is because we had four members of the Republican side who voted no, who stood up and said, no, this enough is enough. President Trump got elected on these issues. We need to deliver on these issues. Similar in the Senate. In the past, like I said, we've had folks that support us, but at the end of the day, they did not stand up to the Chuck Grassley's. They did not stand up to sort of the Iowa pressure, if you will, in some instances, or the Alaska pressure in some instances. So that has been a sea change, and really, we've always had this sort of climate wing of the Republican Party that, the same four or five or six people that, in the media, folks in the media have sort of glommed onto them as sort of this hope that, they'll be able to give reason to the Republican Party on these issues. But that's not the case anymore. Like the Republican Party recognizes the public recognizes that climate is an issue. We don't dismiss climate as an issue. We just think that market solutions and the policies that the left and the Democratic Party have pushed on these issues, and I'm not cheerleading for Republicans per se. I'm just saying that um, the pain, the issues, the challenges, the problems that those policies created for very little benefit were not the right approach. If you look, I'll just take fracking, for example. No one on the climate side of the equation gives credit for what the switching of fuel due to the proliferation of natural gas did to reduce emissions in this country, way more than any kind of benefits from the IRA probably would have produced. So I think that's the main difference is um, development. We've education, because it's taken a long time for folks to sort of understand these things. All of the above was sort of the mantra of the party. And it's not the case anymore. It's more like energy realism. I know Secretary Wright is big on abundance, sort of energy abundance, and that's kind of in vogue these days. But it's all sort of wrapped up in the same thing. So that's kind of my long-winded way of saying that, it's just that the change has been that it has become important for enough for politicians to expend political capital to get the results.
Yeah, and I would add to that. So during reconciliation, especially from the coalition work that we did, one of the big changes that I saw was people taking interest in energy issues who traditionally wouldn't be there. So think tanks, other, nonprofits in the policy space. I think the shifting landscape with like AI and just the general acknowledgement that public sentiment on climate issues has never really been aligned with how hard and how fast they've driven that stuff. Um, when the bill was being debated and we were working with some other groups on just trying to figure out, what we could get done in that process, groups that traditionally just wouldn't necessarily be taking an interest in energy started to this year, and importantly, recognize some of the flaws and some of the mistakes we've been making for the past, decade plus on these issues. And just from my perspective, I really think, where energy used to be sort of a niche policy issue in some cases, now there's a lot more people who are taking interest in these things and are assessing these issues from more realistic outlook on things. That's been
Yeah,
a
I'll
big
give you a
change.
perfect example. When we set up the Save Our Cars coalition, we figured we'd get the usual suspects involved in the coalition, the CEIs and others, and really we got trade associations that deal with car parts, that sell aftermarket car parts. We had groups that are more aligned with sort of social conservative issues. Um, the liberty, minded people. And a lot of reason is because, for example, one organization reached out and said, we need to be involved in this issue because all of a sudden, all the women in my organization have been spun up about banning gas stoves, right? Like that kind of popped up out of nowhere in this organization's amongst their grassroots. And then the cars obviously were the second thing that sort of prompted this. So the overreach on the other side of taking away our personal choice in these issues did a lot of damage, quite frankly, to the other side's agenda because they start out with, well, we're running out of these resources. We don't have enough of them, so we have to switch. We got to use biofuels. We got to, use wind and solar. Or we got this homegrown energy to, once we had all the oil and gas through shale revolution, um, then they switched their messaging to, well, we got to keep it in the ground, right? And then they focused on pipeline infrastructure and everything else. And then they still didn't get a lot of traction or a lot of success. So they just said, you know what? Forget it. We're just going to start banning it. You guys aren't playing ball. You guys aren't coming along with us. So we're just going to start banning things because you just aren't playing ball or you don't get it, right? And that really opened up the universe of organizations that were interested in and focused on these issues. And they needed organizations like ours to give them the research and the messaging and the tools that they needed to participate in that process. So super proud of the Save Our Cars coalition. I think we're up to like 45 members of that coalition, very broad ranging and not traditional in terms of people who have been involved in these debates.
And just on the public sentiment side there, we started Save Our Cars, I think 3 years ago now. And at the time, I think it was just sort of a foregone conclusion that the forced transition to EVs was going to happen. Nobody was really questioning it, at least publicly. We know behind the scenes, certainly people were, sort of saying a different story there. But the
Are you
shift
saying we saved the auto industry from itself? Is that
potentially.
what you're saying, Alex?
Well, it's interesting because I think Tom and I, on that issue in particular, we've been close to that situation. Tom, I think you've had family members who have worked for the auto industry. I grew up outside of Detroit. Most of my family has worked in that industry, and the gap that always existed between what people were saying publicly and then what you would hear from people who were actually working at these companies and stuff, it was so obvious that what the public discussion was, where it was being led was so out of step with what consumers actually want and what the people who are actually working at these companies actually believe they could do. Being able to build that coalition, I think, what was really a great project for us. But it's just been great to see The success that we've had this year, rolling back obviously the tax credits, and then some of the stuff that got done in reconciliation as well. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a long time coming, and it's great to. I mean, we have to hold the gains. Obviously, California's not going away. They've already told car manufacturers, too bad. You need to live by we're gonna submit new. We're gonna keep going at this. There's still going to be pockets of efforts to try and undo this stuff. But by and large, I think, we're going to get to a point where the autos recognize that these changes are lasting, and then they've already done it. They already were doing it during all of this, losing tens of thousands of dollars per car that rolled off the lot. But I think that it gives the auto industry the ability to long-term plan based on customer preference. And you already see that in the explosion of hybrids, which is an easy answer, right? You get the best of both worlds, and never made sense to me why they were so strident that it had to be EV only, right? In terms of the Biden administration. So,
okay, thank you, Tom. So now what I want to do is hand things over to AEA's Vice President of Policy, Kenny Stein here. I want to give him an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're watching going forward and what we can expect through the end of the year. Tom, if you want to jump in this part too, happy to hear your thoughts. But Kenny, I'll turn things over to you now to talk about what our priorities are going forward here, and what we're watching in Congress and from the administration.
Sure. Well, we're not expecting much in Congress. Let's be realistic. OBBB was the big lift. We've got the rest of the year is going to be consumed with spending fights and the CR fights, and then once we change over January, everything's going to be about the midterms. So realistically, we're not expecting a huge amount of movement. There is some discussion about permitting reform, the perennial permitting reform that we're going on 10 years now, I think, that we've been talking about permitting reform. And there's obviously there's always going to be proposals out there. For us, though, the biggest priority in this discussion is getting real reforms to underlying regulations like the National Environmental Policy Act. If we're going to have a bipartisan permitting reform, it needs to actually change the underlying law. It can't just tinker at the edges. It can't just hand a few goodies to pipelines, hand a few goodies to transmission, and then call that the end, because the problem with permitting is the underlying law. It is NEPA. It is the way NEPA is abused. It's the way the litigation side of the Endangered Species Act of NEPA, of a lot of different laws, is abused by folks who don't want things to be built of any kind. So that's the most important thing for us in this permitting reform, is real permitting reform. If we're going to pass something, it needs to be substantive, and it needs to make a change. And it can't just be building transmission easier. Because speaking realistically, we as ratepayers, we as average Americans, don't need more electric transmission. Electric transmission is needed by specific sectors. It's wind and solar generation developers, and then to a lesser extent, there are some folks in the data center industry that need some transmission built. But the point is that is the cost of that transmission, and people talk about trillions of dollars worth of transmission build out. That is to the benefit of a narrow minority of the American people and of the American industry. And it's important that everyone else is going to end up paying for this transmission, because that's the way the utilities work. That's the way the electricity system works. And if we are going to be paying for that, it needs to be for the public benefit, not for the narrow benefit of specific energy generators or specific industries. And so that's our biggest concern with the permitting reform, is that there was some discussion in the previous Congress. There was a few things were handed out to help pipelines slightly, and then there was a massive giveaway on the transmission side. And that is not a fair trade-off. That is not a trade-off that should be acceptable, certainly with the Republicans controlling Congress. So that's going to be the one potential issue on these policy issues that we might see before the end of the year. Come next year, that the likelihood of a permitting reform becomes much less likely, because we're going to be in midterms. It's going to be a knockdown, drag out fight. And we all there already is going to be difficulty making 60 votes in the Senate for any kind of permitting deal. There are it's these issues are very polarized. So if you can't get to 60 votes this year, it's almost certainly not happening next year in the heat of an election campaign. Some of there's some smaller things that sort of touching on these issues. I know this week the House is voting on a couple things about cross-border permitting and about the interconnection queue. And some of those things are worthy things to address, but they're not major game changers. Especially because in the cross-border permitting bill, there really shouldn't be cross-border permits at all. So this effort to change who is approving the permit doesn't change the underlying problem that of permitting abuse that can happen. So these bold actions seems unlikely, certainly coming out of Congress. But we'll continue to advocate for some of the things that are in our blueprint that were not addressed earlier this year. Things like dealing with national monuments and reforming the Antiquities Act, passing the REINS Act, which should be a no-brainer for a Republican Congress. We're also dealing with appliance standards. I'll talk in a minute about the administration has been working hard to roll back some of these aggressive appliance energy efficiency standards that the Biden administration undertook. But the way to really fix those things is Congress needs to change the underlying statute because there's only so much that the executive branch can do to rein in some of these mandates that ultimately originate with Congress. So that's legislative action that should happen. It needs to happen. It's something that, again, a Republican Congress, this should be easy for them to vote. In fact, when we've had votes on things like the gas stoves, there's been a number of Democrats that have voted in favor of the CRAs on those things. So taking action on some of these energy efficiency standards should be a bipartisan project. And then we will continue to advocate about the renewable fuel standard and the way it raises fuel costs for all Americans, the way it just distorts the market, and it's a has-been. It's a leftover from 20 years ago when George Bush said we need to end our dependence on foreign oil. Well, we've ended our dependence on foreign oil. Today, what the RFS does that does not displace oil from abroad, it's displacing domestic production. So at this point, it's actually anti-national security. And even worse than that, in order to meet the mandate, we've been having to import biofuels from overseas in order to meet the RFS mandate. So it's not only has ceased to matter for national security purposes because of domestic production, it's actually increasing imports, which completely turns the whole point of the program on its head.
I want to
So
can
that's
I
up.
jump in
Yeah.
on that because this is an area where we obviously differ with the Trump administration. For the life of me, I don't understand how they can't equate this with the EV issue, right? It's one and the same. There is a market for ethanol. Refiners use the product for octane. They should be the ones who decide the volumes that should be included in our gas, right? It's very logical, but this has gotten political, right? It's like we got to help the farmers. We got to help the farmers. Where we wrote comments critical of the EPA more recent decision to increase the volumes, which is crazy. And we're supporting Senator Lee's legislation to deal with the SRE shuffle. You can get into that more specifically, or if people have questions about that. And then you still have this pocket of Republicans who want this stuff. Obviously, Iowa. But they're talking about including ships to be utilized to put more ethanol into diesel and ship engine ships. So this is just crazy that on the one hand you've got a Republican Senator Lee pushing to make work towards getting rid of this thing, and then you got other Republicans who are pushing to expand it. So this is an issue where we're going to be heavily involved, I think, in the next few months to try to prevent any shenanigans on Capitol Hill. I know there was a NDAA, there was an attempt to try to insert some language in that, which I think has been thwarted for now. And we got to continue to educate the Trump administration about this issue. You can do a lot for farmers. You're not enriching farmers with this program. You're enriching a very niche lobby in the sort of, biodiesel, mafia, if you will. And so, yeah, so we're going to be very involved in that issue in the coming months. Sorry, Kenny, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean that kind of segues into the administrative executive action because we're talking about the RFS. It should be reformed in Congress, but what exists there is obviously being defended by the small minority of folks. And talking about the national, I already said the national security justification for it is completely gone. At this point, it's protecting a special interest. It's a special interest handout, and that's precisely the type of thing that in the OBBB that was a very strong argument for eliminating those special interest handouts, those energy specific favors, and that's what Donald Trump ran on and won. That's what Republicans won on in the 2024 election. That resonates with the public. Unfortunately, that is a place that administratively the Trump administration just announced that they're going to attempt to reallocate some of the volume mandates from the RFS that were waived from because they were a hardship on small refiners. Though of course they're also a hardship on large refiners too. So it's odd that we're going to say we're going to transfer the hardship to someone else. Frankly, that's not. There's no statutory support for that. This is something that's being made up. So it's obviously something that we're going to oppose and fight. But that is something that is hanging out there that is going to be a fight the rest of the year. We also have the comments for the tailpipe rule, the tailpipe emissions rule, and which involves the endangerment finding. That comment period closes next week, and finalizing that and where the administration ultimately goes with that is going to consume a lot of the rest of the year. Because even in clearly the administration's preference is to withdraw the endangerment finding, but they had multiple other avenues of softening the emission standards, uh, separating the endangerment finding from the tailpipe emission standards. So where they end up going is still an open question, but it's very significant, especially because the endangerment finding is the foundation of a lot of the overreach that the Biden administration pursued. Ultimately traces back to that original endangerment finding from the beginning of the Obama administration. Tom already briefly mentioned the CAFE standards. That is still hanging out there. Earlier this year, the NHTSA said that they would no longer enforce the previous CAFE standards because they felt they were illegal. We had the OBBB eliminate the penalties for it. But the CAFE standards still exist as a statutory mandate, and so NHTSA does have to produce some replacement for that. The impact of it is open to question because if there are no financial penalties for it, how strictly are the autos going to follow whatever standards come out? But that action is still coming, and that's obviously going to lead, almost certainly going to feed into significant litigation that's going to last the rest of the Trump administration's term. Briefly mentioned appliance standards earlier. That's something that the Trump administration continues to be very good on. They're working hard to roll things back to the extent they can. Again, Congress ultimately is the problem there, but we can hope that they will continue to make things better. And then some of the other things that they've already begun on are things like clawing back money from the loan programs. That's going to continue the rest of the year. And there's obviously litigation ongoing about that. Finalizing the repeal of the Clean Power Plan, the Biden 2.0 Clean Power Plan. Should happen this year, and then we'll proceed into litigation on that as well. And then a big thing is that for us, and then this is something that isn't necessarily in part of the public conversation, but it's rooting out the social cost of carbon from all rulemakings, because this was part of the Biden administration whole of government approach. It was injecting a social cost of carbon discussion into every single cost benefit analysis in every agency, which is questionable legally and statutorily, but it was done. And going in all these rule rewrites and new regulations that come out, it's ensuring that those previous social cost of carbon estimates are truly rooted out, and don't continue some of these zombie things continuing on because someone forgot to pull back a certain rule or cross out a little section of things. Um, as far as stuff that needs addressing again, from our blueprint that the administration still hasn't really gotten to, things like national monuments. That is something the Trump administration did was very good on the first time around. They haven't really gotten to that yet. I know the Department of Interior has been generally working to improve land management, but that's a major thing uh, that is action that needs to start the ball rolling now because, again, talking about litigation, there will be litigation about any changes to these national monuments. And if you expect to hope to get any of these done before the end of the Trump administration, you need to start things now. We also have the Waters of the United States rulemaking that we're anticipating here within maybe this week, but very, very soon. That's going to be an open question too, because there's some indication that the administration may not go as far as the Supreme Court has indicated they should in the Sackett decision. So that's a place that we may be pushing the administration to really fully take the license that the Supreme
We
Court has
filed a
given them.
petition on that early in the year. So my advice to the administration is just read the petition.
Yeah,
Got
right.
everything you
Do what
need
we
in
said.
there to
Right.
take care of this issue once and for all. So
Yeah.
easy. It's like wrapped in a bow, you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah. And then the final thing is as we were saying earlier, some of the climate change discussion has been gotten sotto voce in this because of increasing rate costs and because of inflation. Um, some of the environmental advocates have recognized that there's a cost of living problem with a lot of their policy recommendations. But a lot of this climate industrial complex still continues on in the background, and one of the big things about that is the National Climate Assessment. The next director of the next National Climate Assessment needs to be appointed. That process is beginning, and the Trump administration has an opportunity to influence it. And a big thing that we have advocated, and this is beyond, the right side of the aisle. There are climate scientists who have knowledge of this as well, is making sure that the most extreme climate scenarios are not what the National Climate Assessment is based on. It's the things like RCP 8.5, which is an extraordinarily extreme climate scenario, assuming basically that all coal around the globe gets burned up. And then you take that extreme scenario, and then you can put out a study that says, that the oceans will destroy the world. But the problem is that extreme scenario is not going to happen. It is not happening now. And so our national climate assessment, which informs a lot of decisions that are made by regulatory agencies. The National Climate Assessment should be focusing on scenarios that are actually happening and that are likely to happen in the future, not an extreme scenario that it gets a great result for a researcher at a university who wants a big number, but it's not what's actually happening. It's not what public policy should be based on. So that's an important change, and that's something that can be done by the administration and really should be done by the administration. And it's just a question of making sure that they're paying attention to this. Again, these are things that are ongoing in the background, and it's making sure keeping an eye on those.
yeah, one thing too on the you mentioned coal. I think there are about 38 coal plants that are slated to be retired under between now and the end of President Trump's term. I'm going to make a bold prediction, and I'm going to say that President Trump, the Trump administration, is going to prevent all 38 of those plants from closing through these designations that they're doing, like the one in Michigan. At least as many of them as they can. And that I think is important because we're in the middle of a discussion about rising demand for electricity for a whole host of reasons, but one of them, of course, is somewhat bipartisan, and that is to be front and center in winning the AI race, right? And one of the biggest changes in the conversation here has been tech. I have a friend who likes to say, we want converts, right? I mean, I have a lot of frustration about sort of the mess that the big tech, the tech bros created with energy and electricity, with their sort of renewable, 100% renewable discussion, at least in their rhetoric, and now have turned around and basically have said, no, we need gas, especially, and nuclear. But they need to take the next step. We need them involved in the pipelines, fixing our infrastructure issues and our challenges there as well. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some movement from them on that. But that really has changed the conversation, is because They too have a sort of abandoned this the sustainability stuff. I mean, Google, for example, it just disappeared on their website, like their memory hole and all of that, right? So, and it's important because prices are rising. Prices are rising generally because of years and years and years of creating a system that you had to build redundancy in the system. You also mentioned, Kenny, transmission, right? Transmission is not free. It's a cost to the system. The wind blows where people don't live. That's been the big argument here is they can't get these transmission lines built through states who don't benefit from the transmission. That makes sense. The state doesn't benefit. Why would they want these things? And so when you talked about the permitting conversation, that's really what the Democrats want out of permitting is the ability to move the decision making away from the states and onto FERC and letting letting the federal government override states so they can build transmission, among other things. But that's sort of the main and that's really not permitting reform. That's socialization of the transmission grid, right? So, like you said, if the Republicans don't get real permitting reform through NEPA and changes that need to take place, and everyone benefits from that, by the way, and not just oil and gas or anything like that, um, then it's not worth it. It's not really permitting reform if we're going to, take away the state's ability to have a decision in what gets built in their state. So I digressed a little, but I wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, and that gets into the discussion of electricity price rises. There's already attempts to point fingers and claim that the reconciliation bill is somehow increasing electricity prices. Though, of course, the subsidies that were ended for especially for wind and solar, that's not actually ended until 2027. So any price rises you're talking about couldn't possibly be responsible there until you're talking about several years in the future. But yes, the price increases and just the demand increase is has changed the conversation, and that's why you don't hear Google bragging about 100% renewables anymore because they need more electricity and they need electricity that's always on, and that's not something you can get from that you can guarantee from 100% renewables. So it has changed the economic incentives have just changed. There 5, 10 years ago, there were PR incentives to saying this, even though it was frankly the 100% renewable promises were involved a lot of buying credits and trading things to make it look on the books like that was the case. That was never really true. But nowadays you can't even pretend anymore because um, you need to keep these coal plants open. You need to reopen nuclear plants. You need to build gas plants. They need to build everything if they have any chance of sustaining the pace of growth that the money that the billions they're investing in data centers and AI. So it has changed the conversation, and frankly, that continued demand is going to continue to drive electricity prices up. We can expect electricity prices to continue to increase, completely independent of the reconciliation bill, because we've had 5 to 10 years, as you kind of said, Tom, 5 to 10 years of malinvestment in the electricity system, and that was the damage of that was hidden because there was no demand increase. Demand nationally was flat to even slightly decreasing. So all the fiddling and damage that was being done to the grid, you didn't immediately feel that impact because you were still trading on many decades worth of long-term investments that had been made in the second half of the 20th century. But now the bill is coming due, and everyone's scrambling to try and figure out how to get reliable electricity all of a sudden now that we have a demand increase.
And one last thing that comes to mind, a lot of this discussion has been obviously
Just a
focused on
reminder, Q&A. Anyone has a question, feed it into the Q&A, please.
um, yeah, a lot of the focus has been at the federal level here, but also tied to this, I think, at the state level, we have policies like RPS, which, obviously the placing the federal subsidies for wind and solar on, a course to be phased down was a tremendous win. But at the state level in the background, we still have these policies that are mandating generation from these sources up to certain target dates. So, on our end, I think one of our focuses at the state level is going to be looking at places where we can work on RPS. If you get rid of the subsidies, but you still have the mandates, it's still going to be creating the same issues. So we've
Right.
been speaking to our coalition partners at the state level there, to look at
And
opportunities.
educate, and yeah, and Alex, that's a great point because education is really important here. You've seen already in the PJM interconnection, you've seen a number of governors complaining about electricity rate rises and about how the PJM capacity markets are getting very expensive and they're not working right. Well, the problem is that they're not working right because about half the states in PJM have renewables mandates. So PJM is trying to balance the damage being done at the state level by states like Maryland, states like New Jersey. Um, and they're trying to balance that, and it's expensive. It gets expensive to balance the costs of these renewables mandates. And a number of these governors are trying to have it both ways. They've got the renewables mandates at home, and then they're trying to blame PJM for the cost increases that go along with those renewables. And so, but it's an education thing, making sure that ratepayers understand that this is not some faceless multi-state entity that's doing this to you. This is the direct result of the policy actions taken by your governors and your legislatures.
Okay, why don't we shift to Q&A at the end here? As we mentioned in the past, so there's an option at the bottom of the screen there to submit questions. Be happy to run through anything anybody has that's on the call
Well,
with us.
while we're waiting for that, I want to throw a
Sure.
couple of points out there. We're obviously focused on what the IRS is going to do with the foreign content in terms of their guidance on the new changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And we've got some specific policy recommendations for that. Um, One other thing for folks who for the public, we revamped the AEA website. It's a lot more user friendly. It's a lot easier to participate in the process. Um, and also a reminder, we have a legislative scorecard, the American Energy Scorecard, where we do rate, vote and rate our elected members on the sort of whether or not they're doing the right thing on energy issues as well. So for just some tools for folks to engage in the process. One other thing too, and you guys don't know this yet, but I have been personally frustrated that we have a leasing process in this country on federal lands that is just dumb. Um, it's a relic. It's outdated. It leads to basically uh, lots and lots of lawsuits, and this whole idea of opening up all these areas and then offering them for lease on a 5-year basis. I think we need to whole scale reform that and change the way that whole process works. And we're going to be working with Congress and folks in the committees to introduce this idea and try to create momentum around changing the leasing process so it's much more workable and much more attuned to this new direction that the Trump administration is heading, which is to making these lands available for energy production. So, any questions coming on board, Al?
Yeah, we got one here. As always, you were a step ahead of me there, Tom. I was going to ask if there was anything we hadn't talked about, and just mentioned the website updates. So I have a question here from Jen Delohy. Tom mentioned at the top of the conversation around climate change, even among businesses and politicians who talked a lot about it before this year, there's been a change. How are you seeing this globally? Is there a Trump effect on the conversation around energy and climate globally?
Well, hi, Jen. Let's grab a drink soon. Hope you're well. Yeah, I do see a change. I mentioned in the beginning, the politicians who would normally be all on board with this, sort of Green New Deal and the green agenda, are coming to the recognition that it has been tremendously impactful in a negative way on their countries. I was just in a conference earlier in the summer, a global conference on a number of issues, but energy was a main topic. And the whole in this conference in the past, the whole focus with respect to energy was climate change and net zero. Well, the topic of that conference with global participation was what the world's going to look like in the net zero reset. I mean, the subject of the matter is it is absolutely clear that these policies are not getting the job done, and what can be done to sort of recognize the need for climate policies, but also sort of take into consideration the realities of the fact that these countries in Europe, in the EU, are countries that have defied the EU, like Poland, are doing fine, right? That's not an issue there. But Germany, the UK, for example, there's growing recognition that something has to change. So I do think that there's some of this is, Europe buying, committing to buy $750 billion worth of energy from the United States. I mean, these things are clearly different from even the first Trump term, where the whole world was like, panning President Trump for having the audacity to pull out of the Paris Agreement. So I do think the Trump effect is having an impact, but I think it's more reality. When you have a land war in Europe, which I think partly stemmed from dependence on Russian gas, for example, that changes people's thoughts and opinions about kind of what direction they want to go. So yeah, I do think that's the case.
One thing I'd highlight there too, I think with Chris Wright at the Department of Energy, a lot of his nonprofit work before he was in the administration was focused on ending energy poverty globally. So I think, to the extent that DOE is involved in some of these international agreements and discussions and things, I think we'll see a shift um, it, in policy towards reorienting away from climate and towards focusing on developing energy and sort of the developing world there. I think that'll be a focus for him. Uh, Question here from Timothy Gardner from Reuters. Tom talked about predicting that all the coal plants scheduled to shut during this Trump term would stay open. Can you talk a little bit about how the admin would pressure that to happen, or would a lot of them voluntarily keep working? And what about complaints that being forced to keep open involves a lot of fuel and personal costs to the company?
Yeah, I think a lot of those plant closures were, sort of part of the commitments or recognition that, maybe the Clean Power 2.0, the reset, was going to happen. And in fact, the reality is that that's still the rule right now, right? I mean, there's no guarantee that it's going to be wiped out completely yet. We got to go through that rulemaking process. But I do think that, the Michigan example, where Secretary Wright basically declared that, it was sort of using their declarations or their national emergency declarations. I think that is going to continue to be the manner by which the Trump administration approaches this issue. Now, I'm personally not a huge fan of these national emergency declarations, because what's good, for one, is good for the other. And you can see a future administration who doesn't see the world the way that we do might want to take the same approach. And so there's a risk there. But I do think that it is legitimate to question whether or not a plant closure should happen prematurely in this climate where energy prices are indeed a challenge, and rising demand for electricity. Um, I'd have to look on a case by case basis at each one of these, I think 38 scheduled plant closures, to see it may have an impact on sort of what the company's plans are. And Kenny, you might want to get into specifics on that, but me personally, I'm not overly worried about that, quite frankly, because um, I think a lot of those decisions were political to begin with,
Yeah.
from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, certainly some of these plants, the utilities want to keep open. In some cases, though, actually, the Trump administration stepping in might actually help them. If they're fighting with their state legislature who's trying to shut them down, they want to keep it open for reliability reasons. but they have a hostile PUC or a hostile governor. Having the Trump administration step in can help them. It can let them do what they wanted to do already, and get them out of some of the state level pressure and some of the RPS requirements, because a lot of these coal plant retirements, they certainly it was about making money. An old depreciated coal plant isn't making you as much money as a new build of something. So that was part of these decisions. But now when they are needing more electricity pretty much everywhere to maintain reliability, a lot of these utilities want to keep these plants open. And frankly, the Trump administration stepping in might just make it a little easier for them to do what they wanted to do anyway. And there's certainly an aspect to it. You're right. That some of these older plants are kind of costly to run. This is a part of the problem, what I've said about the last 5 or 10 years of uh, actively damaging our electricity grid and our reliability, is that now we're kind of left with some of these older plants that we need to keep online, even though, yeah, it would be better if we had a brand new coal plant instead of something that's old and a little more costly to run. But we don't have that flexibility right now because of poor decisions and malinvestment that has been going on for at least the last 10 years.
Yeah, we're coming up on noon. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I do appreciate the folks who joined us today. There are a few more questions here. Alex can capture those, and we can get answers back to the individuals that posed them. Um, if Alex, did you have anything you wanted to wrap with?
Yeah, I just wanted to, offer to the audience here, if anybody has questions or wants to follow up with anyone, they can reach me. My email address is astevens@energydc.org. Always happy to connect you with either Tom or Kenny or myself or anybody on our staff you'd like to talk to. And appreciate everybody being in attendance today, and look forward to having you on a future webinar here.
Yeah, thanks. And just to wrap, I saw a comment from a friend, Jason Hayes over at AFPI. He makes the point that these plants still make money because they still sell electricity and they're still charging customers for them. So it might not be as significant of a hit on these utilities. So thanks for rounding that out, Jason. Appreciate that. And we had a couple questions on my lease plan. Maybe we'll do a webinar on that. I think it's pretty straightforward. We should just offer rolling continuous leases. There's no reason why we have to keep having these weird 5-year plans. And then there was a question about Alaska and the LNG pipeline, which we don't have time to get into now, but we'll spend a little time on that as well. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Alex, for putting this together. This was fun, and let's do it again.